very welcome. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Judy. And it's an honor to be here, to be invited here to talk. And I'm very sorry about the loss of your colleague and teacher, Judy Brown. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. I also wanted to thank Tim and Elke Inkster of Porcupine's Quill, which is one of the presses that I work with, because they funded the travel and made those sorts of arrangements through the Canada Council. So, yeah, I haven't done a lot of talks, so so bear with me. I do more usually workshops with children, poetry workshops and writing workshops and that sort of thing. So I wasn't sure what to emphasize, but I'll try and sort of hit on a bunch of different things. I'm trying to see if there's a clock so I can keep track of myself. There isn't?
Do you want my watch?
Oh, that's great. My watch broke just before I came out. That's great. Thank you. So I guess, yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the history of how I ended up writing for children. I always loved writing poetry. My father sang songs, a lot of folk songs, and songs that had wordplay in them. And so when I went to university, I went to McGill. There was a professor there named Ronald Reichertz. I'm not sure if he's still working in the field, but he taught 3 children's literature courses. And I took the first one just because I thought it would be easy. And it was great. I mean, he opened up a whole world of things I hadn't thought about, books I wouldn't have come across, and really opened up the field to me. And around the same time, I'd started to write more of the things I was writing. And so I had a very bad relationship with my grandmother, and she lived with us. And there were long periods of estrangement, even though she lived with us. But when I went away to university, she was a letter writer, and I love writing letters. But she would send these very bleak letters, like it's 3 a.m. and it's a good day for a murder, and it's raining outside, and it was so depressing. And there was just a disconnect. I didn't know how to respond to her, And so then I knew she hated poetry. It was one of the things. So I thought, you know what? I'll send her a letter that's a poem. And so it ended up in this book. At the time, I had I didn't think of it as something to publish. But, yeah, so I'll read it. I guess this is a good way of doing it. I can just work back and forth with my work. But it was called The Badger, the Barn Fowl, and Their Little Friend the Snail. It's unusually long for me. I won't do another long one, but my love, I see you sitting scribbling nonsense in a book. I can tell you are not happy. It's apparent in your look. Perhaps you will permit me to relate a little tale about a badger and a barn fowl and their little friend the snail. The 3 of them sat talking until late into the night. The badger snarled and growled. Sometimes he gave the others fright. Peep, peep, the barn fowl squeaked. She was a feather-headed sight. But the snail kept very cool and slowly wound himself up tight. The badger told the others how he once had been in love. Too bad it was a bird, he said, a pretty turtle dove. But she turned up her beak at me, that creature of the air. There's no way she would live, she said, in some poor badger's lair. The snail had been in love as well, he told them with remorse, how he had fallen badly for a proud and stately horse. She mistook me for an acorn, and I very nearly died, said their little friend the snail as he unwound again and cried. At least, piped up the barn fowl, you are not loved by a rooster. It was quite true, he crowed and hopped in circles, which confused her. I'd rather live alone than with that noisy circling bird. Then she ruffled up her fluff and wouldn't say another word. My love, I think it best now that we leave these weeping three to their tales of their lost loves and to their love of misery. So my grandmother, of course, didn't know how to respond, and later she just said, you have some peculiar ideas. But I thought what was interesting, and at the time I didn't realize this, and then I looked at it again much later, and I thought it's all about, animals that fall in love with the wrong animal. And something really goes wrong. It's miscommunication all the way through, which was like my grandmother and I. And even at the end, I didn't realize it was sort of a dig at her to their love of misery. And again, I was probably 19, and I wasn't thinking about how, I just wanted to do something different. To get, I don't know if I expected a different reaction, but I just wanted to try something completely different. And it didn't work, but yeah, that's sort of how the first poem I would say I wrote for children was actually for a bitter old lady. And then, I just collected things over the years. And actually, to give my grandmother credit, I feel like I'm being too hard on her. She loved talking. She had all of these aphorisms from her father that she loved using on different occasions. And that's another form of writing which I ended up loving, which came directly from her. I love one-liners or, two-liners or that sort of thing to sum things up, which I think was more common in that generation. You had these adages to help make sense of things quickly or to, I don't know, but I love that sort of thing. So, and so then I did my first couple of books were for adults. I wrote a couple of books of adult poetry, Love is an Observant Traveler and Inklings. And some of these poems probably could have ended up in collections for children, but I wasn't thinking that way anymore. And then in the late 1990s, I picked up a book by someone named Denise Nessel, who she put together this book called Awakening Young Minds. And it was a compilation of essays by different educational theorists and teachers looking at education in all of these different ways. And it was such an exciting book. It was one of those pivotal books that, you come across where I read it and I thought, I have to do something in the schools. I don't know what, but I'd love to work with young people. I write poetry, so I could do poetry workshops. It was that sort of thing. So then I went to volunteer in a local school where a friend of mine worked. And I had no idea really what I was doing, but I would meet with one student at a time. I don't know whose idea this was. It wasn't mine. And give them, something an idea or something to think about, or they would just sit there and write. And I would never, it actually worked well with some of the kids. Now I think how horrible you're sitting there and this adult is sitting with you and you're trying to write something. But it was so interesting. The kid I remember best, I could see really didn't want to do this at all. And he had a piece of paper in his pencil crayon box that he would bring out, and I tried to get him to write, and I could tell he was just finding it stressful and annoying. And then he wrote, just one sentence, there was an ice planet. So then I thought, okay, I was hoping for more. But then the next week he came back again, and he wrote, he had the same piece of paper, the king of the ice planet lived by himself. So then the next week he came back, and it's the queen of the ice planet lived on the other side of the planet. And then the next week, which was my last week with him, he wrote, the king and the queen of the ice planet never met. And that was so beautiful. It was just amazing. And, what it made me realize was that kids work very differently. Some kids are very articulate and prolific, and it all comes pouring out. And some kids are very slow. They work very slowly. It was just it also made me realize like a child can write something that's more profound in some ways and more exciting than what you would read in a lot of literary journals. You know, that it made me realize a lot of different things doing that work. You know, and so I applied to Teachers College and I didn't get in, which in the end probably was a good thing. But that was sort of my, you know, part of my journey to writing for kids. You know, in terms of publishing, I was very lucky that there were all of these small Canadian presses, and I had some connection with the adult presses because that's what I had been doing. And so I went to Peddler Press, which does almost all adult titles, and I said, I have this idea, I have a collection of poems for children. And Beth Follett, who runs the press, said, I really don't want to do it because I don't want to start getting submissions for children's books. You know, it's not, I really don't want to do it. But then, again, there was this, you know, a book sort of saved me. I don't know, probably many of you have read Ursula Nordstrom's letters, Dear Genius. And I happened to read it right around then, and a children's bookseller in Toronto had just given it to Beth Follett. And she also loved it. And I think that book made her feel like, okay, you know what, I'll risk something and I'll do it. And because I had just read it, we were able to sort of communicate around those letters. And so then she ended up doing this, you know, the first one, The Man in the Moon Fixer's Mask, which I'm not sure how much luck I would have had trying to publish this manuscript with a more regular children's press. I have worked since with Anik and with Kids Can, but I think they were willing to risk more because the other books had been done. I'm not sure. It was very hard to get those books done with Kids Can and with Anik. The book that I did with Kids Can, Think Again, which was illustrated by Julie Morstad, who I think is a local. I've never met her. I've only exchanged a couple of emails with her. But it was interesting. I went to... Kids Can happen to be on the same block as the public school my children went to. So I thought, oh, you know what, I'll just go in and introduce myself. And the editor there, Sheila Berry, was very nice, and I showed her some of my poetry, and she said, we really don't do a lot of poetry. And but she said, when you have a manuscript, come back. So I did, and then she said, I love it, but the marketing people will never allow this. They'll never allow it. And she spent probably a year and a half going back into committee meetings trying to get them to do something. And they couldn't get their heads around it. And again, it was sort of the marketing people. They were independent, and then they were bought by Chorus Entertainment. So Chorus Entertainment has a different business model, which is everything has to make money. And so then an editor there had an interesting idea. She said, you know, it was actually this book and this book were originally one book. It was one big manuscript. And an editor said, you know what, there are a lot of love poems and thinking poems in the manuscript. What if you take those out and put it into some sort of sequence and see if you can, you know, think of a story. That it doesn't have to be a very clear story. The illustrator can take care of a lot of it. But can you give that a try? So I did, and it was actually very interesting. The poems I realized I hadn't done this consciously, but they were all about a relationship in high school, the girl I went out with in high school, and then our, you know, terrible breakup. But, you know, things I'd been ruminating about, and I actually married my high school sweetheart much later. So, of course, I was still thinking about her. And so it was very interesting because it was originally just a bunch of random poems, and then it turned out that there was this sequence which this editor had seen. It was probably the most interesting, editorial relationship in that sense, because I wouldn't have seen it. And then they showed me a few different illustrators' work, and they liked Julie Morstadt a lot, and I did too. I like how simple her drawings are. And then Julie Morstadt sort of created the dynamic with the illustrations. So that was a great experience. But then I had this other pile of poems, which was, I've got another book. So I went to Porcupine's Quill, which had done Fowler's it is bestiary. I always thought it was bestiary. And it was the first time I presented it. Someone said to me, actually, you're not pronouncing the title properly. But I still think of it as Fowler's bestiary. And Porcupine's Quill, this was another, strange publishing experience. I sent them a few of the poems. Usually, I know any of you who've tried to publish, it's very arduous. You have to keep sending things out and getting rejected. But this time, they wrote back half an hour later and said, do you have more of these? Of course, we'd love to do this. So that was, really thrilling. And they even let me illustrate it, which they regretted. With this book, they wouldn't let me illustrate it. But then I went to another press, and this book just came out, and they did let me illustrate this one. They didn't know about about that. So then I thought, okay, Porcupine's Quill will also accept this one in 5 minutes. And it took them almost a year. They weren't sure, and then they sent it to the editor I'd worked with on that book, and he said he didn't think it was worth doing, which is fair enough. I mean, that's what people have to give their opinions. But then someone an intern working in their office, looked at it, and she said, I think it's great, and I know someone I think would be really good illustrator for this book. So then she saved it, really. And then I think they were happy in the end that they did it. I'm sure they were happy. But this again was a very interesting relationship with an illustrator. Usually you don't know the illustrator at all. Actually, I don't really know Alec Dempster. He lives around the corner, but his form of art is to cut pictures out of pieces of paper. So although these look sort of like woodcuts, they're about double this size in reality. But he cuts them with X-Acto blades, so they're magnificent works of art, all on their own. He ended up having an art show of the pictures for this book. And I bought a few of them. He gave me a discount. So Alec maybe it took him a year and a half to do the pictures. So again, start to finish, from the time I submitted it to the time it came out, was almost 3.5. It was 3.5 years. This book is very dear to me because my children were very involved in helping me edit it, and even in writing it. We would go for walks early in the morning, and they would, I would tell them what I was working on, and they would criticize it and suggest things. So I'll read a poem from this. This was sort of interesting. When my middle son was about 3 and my daughter was 6, my son was worrying about the Noah's Ark story. And I was eavesdropping. They didn't know I was listening to them. And he said, Sophie, what happened to the elves and all those other creatures that didn't make it onto the ark? And Sophie said, don't worry. They built another ark for those creatures. And then she even wrote a little 4-line poem about it. And at the time, I write down a lot of what they say because I find it useful. So I had jotted this down on an envelope, and then 6 months later I was thinking about it, and then I wrote this poem. But what was interesting was that I had forgotten that my daughter had already written her own poem. And then after the book came out, I found the envelope. And I did credit her in the back, but her poem was different, but it was still similar. You know, I had ripped her off almost completely without realizing it. But, and it's called Our Imaginary Selves. I'm sorry, Noah said, we've taken all that we can carry. God never said I could save anyone imaginary. Don't worry, said the griffin to the downcast dwarves and elves. We'll build another ark for our imaginary selves. Which I thought was, you know, so it was really a neat idea. And there was actually another similar sort of story, and oh, I hope I brought it. Oh, yeah. Because for me, it demonstrates, you know, one of the interesting things working with that kid who wrote the Ice Planet poem was that it made me realize, too, that kids are really worrying about the same kinds of things, you know, that adults are worrying about. And because I was the youngest child and I didn't have a lot of younger cousins, I hadn't spent time with children after I was a child. And so I had forgotten a lot of that. What do children think like? And, you know, and then hearing my kids talking like that, also I realized they have the same concerns about life and death and stability and, you know, like maybe that kid was writing about his parents, or maybe he was just talking without realizing about his own inner conflict, you know. He felt icy and parts of him were separated. And so this was also my daughter with her best friend. I was driving them once in a car to a camp. So I think they were around 6. So my daughter said to her friend that she kept picturing, I'll read what I wrote because it's easier. Sophie told Vivian that she kept picturing Vivian's severed head and it bothered her. Vivian asked what severed meant. Sophie told her. Vivian wanted to know if her head was just hovering in the air or on the floor. Sophie said it was on the floor. Vivian wanted to know if the floor had any pattern or if it was just a plain floor. Sophie said it was just plain. They both looked uncomfortable. I was, you know, watching in the rearview mirror and I didn't want to interfere. And Sophie said, I have an idea. I'll make a poem out of it. She said, your severed head is on the floor. I throw it out the open door. Your body follows it and then puts its head back on again. Vivian liked this. They went over it a few times together to memorize it. Then 5 minutes later, Vivian had made up a tune for it and they were singing it together. So, you know, and then, so Sophie had taken a static image, an image that had become a barrier or a burden to her, and then set it in motion. She didn't just try to get rid of it, which she probably sensed wouldn't be possible, and so instead she made use of it. I had never told her that saying something aloud or making a poem out of something that disturbed her might help her to get rid of some of its burden. She came to this on her own, which I thought was so interesting, you know. And again, it shows how, you know, I guess the why of children's poetry, or how can it work, or what difference does it make. I think that, you know, that's a good example too. It gives the child something to work with. And in the workshops I do, I try to give them dynamic examples that they can work with. And it isn't for everybody. Some people don't think that way. But for those that do, it can be useful. So yeah, there was something I had read from that touches on this from an anthology Robert Graves put together in the 1920s called The Less Familiar Nursery Rhymes. And in it he states, the best of the older nursery rhymes are nearer to poetry than the greater part of the Oxford Book of English Verse. Nursery rhymes, in other words, have been part of... I'm saying this is... Robert Graves had made a very careful study of how people read and what sorts of effects reading had on people. so when he wrote his books or rewrote his books, or sometimes he rewrote other people's books, he tried to make them as streamlined as possible, so the language didn't get in the way, that you were reading. In some ways, I think it's why he's not as well known as a lot of the modernist writers, because he didn't try to develop a style that was distinctive. He really tried to use, to write in a style that wasn't distinctive, where his voice didn't get in the way of what he was trying to say, which can happen. I mean, it can, it's a complicated world, literature, but he also said children unlearned in the social, so children who hadn't learned the social uses of poetry usually recognize and prefer the poem of greatest individuality and do not ask of it that it makes sense. That is, that it correspond with the reality of the schoolroom world. Nor has their natural sense of rhythm been destroyed by the metronome of schoolroom prosody. Poetry must, for them, have above all things movement, which I thought it's so interesting. It made me think about when about 5 years ago, I did an anthology with Walker Books in England, and they asked me to compile, it's not easy to come by here. It was Walker's sister press, which is Candlewick, didn't want to do it. There was it's poetry and commentary. So I asked children's poets from all these different English-speaking countries. I asked them about a particular poem to talk about its genesis. And one of the British poets wrote a very negative piece on the United States somehow in his commentary. And I'm not sure if that's why Candlewick didn't. At first they were very excited about it, and then they suddenly pulled the plug on it. And it was 2008, so it was a different political time and climate. It may just be that they didn't want to do it. But I noticed with a lot of the poems that I picked for this, that dynamic, that something unusual about the rhythm or the imagery was often what drew me. And then the commentaries are quite interesting. You can hear, I don't know how many of you know Carol Ann Duffy, who's a really fine children's poet and adult poet. She really covers both. But this piece she wrote called 5 Girls. Philomena Cooney wears green sandals, yellow ribbons, silver bangles, knows 3 secrets, lives in a tent in the middle of a field near the River Trent. Arabella Murky speaks in Latin, keeps her cat and sleeps in satin, went to Turkey just like that, absolutely loved it, a Moa Massamat. Isadora Dooley loves her jewelry, pearls on Sundays, diamonds Mondays, rubies Tuesdays, Wednesdays blue days, Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, it doesn't really matter days. And it goes on like that, but you can see it's a very fast, playful rhythm. And in her commentary was very short. And I'll read it because I think it's interesting. I wrote this poem to amuse my daughter Ella when she was 4 or 5. 2 of the names are the names of real children she knew at the time. One is a name recalled from my own childhood. My own mother invented similar rhymes to amuse me when I was a child. The other great influence on me in childhood was the work of Lewis Carroll. But I thought the connection to her mother was especially interesting. And in a lot of children's poetry that I've really liked, that's often been, it's something oral. The person is writing out of an oral tradition. And I was thinking even of the things, I guess I'm 10 minutes or so. Then I was thinking about these things my father had sung and things I had heard in musicals, especially musicals, which were, when you think of the Wizard of Oz lyrics, Yip Harburg's lyrics for those songs, they're incredible, and you'll still hear people singing, I can while away the hours conferring with the flowers and somewhere over the rainbow, and they were just, brilliant wordplay. And The Court Jester, the Danny Kaye movie, I'm not sure. I mean, it's not popular anymore. but his wife wrote a lot of the lyrics for that movie as well. And they're just incredible wordplay. And, I was thinking of the things I had liked, like even Spider-Man, the cartoon, had a great theme song. But when you look at the lyrics and you see why is it so compelling, I mean, the tune is also, but like if you listen, Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. And this is my favorite part. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Like that's, it's very clever and you remember it. And, I was thinking about the success of Alligator Pie, and I think part of the success of Alligator Pie wasn't even, I mean, part of it was the imagery, and it is great, but part of it is that Dennis Lee really varied his rhythms a lot. Like, one of my favorite is Mumbo Jumbo, Christopher Columbo, sitting on the sidewalk chewing bubble gumbo. I think I'll catch a whale, I think I'll catch a snail, I think I'll sit around a while chewing bubble gumbo.
It's twiddling my bumbo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
I don't know why I apologize.
No, it's good. It's good. But he really varied his rhythms a great deal. And it's part of what makes it compelling. If you're reading a collection of poetry to children, it makes a huge difference. Like Jack Prelutsky, whose work I love, and to read one of his collections, he doesn't actually vary his rhythms as much. And so, you find if you read poetry a lot to kids, there are books that work very well, and then books that you really need to be selective. Like just take a couple of the poems, but otherwise it's too machine-like, and it grinds at you. And, this other one I wanted to pull out because it shows you, it's like Spider-Man, children's poetry may be lurking where you don't expect. And I was reading one of my sons' Robert Munch book, Moira's Birthday, which is, I mean, it's pretty good. But then towards the end, suddenly there's this poem. I don't know if Robert Munch has written any others, but this was so good. And this is the part my kids wanted to hear over and over. There was fried goat, rolled oats, burnt toast and artichokes, old cheese, baked fleas, boiled bats and beans. There was eggnog, pork sog, simmered soup and hot dogs, jam jars, dinosaurs, chocolate bars and greens. And that's really good. That's really, really good. And it's sitting there in this story that otherwise has nothing to do with it. And I had this idea, actually, to do an anthology of children's poetry from unusual sources, but nobody wanted to do it, that I talked to anyway. They actually thought it would be too difficult to get the rights to do, because some of the pieces are from musicals, and some of the pieces are from commercials, so they're really good. I don't know how many of you are old enough for the, when you get your Smarties, do you eat the red ones last? That's been stuck in my head for 40 years. And so I thought that would be a really sort of a neat compilation. And also to link kids to, so when you're doing a workshop or you're talking about children's poetry, they know that they already know so much. They're already connected to this whole world of rhyming and wordplay, and it's not something that has to come at them from the outside. It's something that's already there, in them if they've been listening to those things or watching those things. I don't know. I was going to talk about some of the workshop pieces I do, but I'm afraid I'll run out of time. Read poems? You know what I'll do? I brought, this is because this is so recent. This book came out last year, Old MacDonald Had Her Farm. And this is for the very small crowd. And this was actually one that was rejected so many times, probably 6 times. And then finally, Anik said, come and discuss it. And they said to me, so we like it, but you tell us why we should do it. They wanted to see if I could sell it, I guess. And that's not my forte, but they still, in the end, agreed to do it. And I had to edit it a lot, and it's tricky because, for a little background, this book is all vowel play. It's all, I don't know how many of you know Christian books, Eunoia, where he did this incredible book where he used, limited vocabulary based on vowels. So I thought, wouldn't it be neat to do that for children? So that's how this book evolved. And you can hear, I'll read just one or two. I got obsessed with vowels for a few years. And I had, I needed these long vocabulary lists. And, and then I met Christian Book a couple of years after it came out, and he had just seen it. I'd always wanted to send it to him, but then I'd heard he was a difficult person. Sorry, Christian Book, if you ever hear this. But, but he was so nice, and he said, you know what, I always thought of Eunoia as a children's book, but nobody else would. There's a lot of, I don't know, I wouldn't read it to my kids because of some of the language, but it was interesting. He was very enthusiastic about the fact that I'd stolen his idea. So I'll just read to give you some background to Old MacDonald. Stuck-up gulls must trust dumb ducks. Duck slurps up mud, culls crusts, gulps bugs. Stuck-up gull shuns ducks, spurns ducks bugs, tut-tuts ducks muck, but gulls upthrust mug, juts up, crusts, glug glug, but gulls dud luck, stuck crust. Gull gulps, grunts, splurts thrust, dumbstruck duck jumps up, thumps gull's rump, gull burps up on stuck crust, hurruck, stuck-up gulls must trust dumb ducks. And it's interesting, when I've done this, worked with this book with kids, they often love it because of the strangeness of the sound. I mean, usually when you talk, you try to stretch your vowels out across all of your words. And, but when I've shown it to principals or teachers, sometimes they'll say, well, the vocabulary is much too difficult. And I can see that. But it's more the sound of it. And then the idea that it's sort of a game appeals to kids often. So then I kept thinking about the vowel idea. Once you start, it's hard to stop because everything you hear, you think, oh, that could have been a good word to use. So I had this idea to redo the Old MacDonald song. And I always hated the song when I was little because it was so repetitive. But then I thought, this would be sort of a neat way of canceling what I didn't like about it. But the trouble was, when it was turned into a book, some of the vocabulary I really liked got taken out. It was sort of a committee. Like, Anik was very nice. They were very nice to work with. But at the same time, when you write a book and you have 5 people contributing their point of view, you can start to... I think the quality in the end of the text wasn't what I wanted it to be. I wished afterwards that I had just said, no, I want to control the text completely. But I was so excited, and they were paying me so much that that I didn't say anything. So after the book came out, it got good reviews, but one of the things people said was that it isn't singable. And that was one of the unfortunate things in the editorial process. Because you start to think rationally, well, it isn't really a song, it's a book, and so if it's a book, do you still have to be able to sing it? In retrospect, yes, because it is based on the song. You do have to be able to sing it. So after it was done, I rewrote it. And it was so freeing because I thought, the book is done and now you're stuck with it. And then I thought, no, that's not true. It's just a book, and I'm free to rewrite it if I want to. So it's largely the same, but I made it more singable. So I'll sing it with the guitar. I should have just enough time. And I have a few sheets if anyone wants to sing along. And yeah? Okay. to someone else. It's a little tricky. Yeah? I mean, I don't think anyone else wanted to, but... No, nobody has to. There's no... Yeah. Oh, yeah, should I stand? Doesn't make... Okay. Oh, I just hit it. Okay, the refrain is easy. Okay. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across an A, this is what she'd do. Saw barn planks, slapbacks, pack cats, trap rats, crank hand cranks, and whack and gnats. Stand slack and haphazard, act awkward, walk backward, fast bats, flash past, hang lax at last. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across an E, this is what she'd do. Get helpers, mend fences, bend her knees, feed geese between hen legs, perfect eggs. Sneeze deep, helpless sneezes, then fetch fresh cheeses where duet trees meet the sweet pea breezes. That sounded good. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across an I, this is what she'd do. Lift pigs, sift grits, spit pits, fix bricks, trim twigs, split sticks, flick ticks and ricks. That's an easy one. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across an O, this is what she'd do. Bolt doors, stop hogs, toss food to dogs, porch lock, stops flocks, cows chomp on socks, mow crops non-stop, from top to bottom or from bottom to top. Look now to how bullfrog hops, how crows swoop down off old rooftops. So the S is missing off rooftops, sorry. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across a U, this is what she'd do. Tug, mud, stuck, trucks, lurch, bulls, buck, bump, thump, rumpus, ugh, crunch, munch, bunch, cut plums, clutch her thumbs, crush, spub, sculp, nuts, slurp up lunch. Old MacDonald had 5 vowels, A-E-I-O-U. And when she came across a Y, she didn't know what to do. Hey, that was great. Yeah, so that's...
We can turn over to questions.
Sure.
For the rest of our talk. And
I just want to say that was really liberating that you said that you couldn't sing it, because my daughter and I tried over and over again, and we were sure it was us.
Yeah, no, it wasn't you. It was my fault. Wasn't that so easy to sing to? Well, what I normally do, if I'm doing this as a workshop, kids are actually very fast with it, but usually I'll go through it once, and then the second time, the end of the verse always turns to mud, but the beginning always starts so strong, and it's, yeah. Uh-huh.
I have a question. When you were talking about Valor's Bestiary, you said you made collections of vocabulary lists, and I was wondering if there was any method to that collecting, or if it was just kind of spontaneous, as you just had it in your mind over a couple of years, or how you just found these words that you used and put them together.
I think it was actually great at the time. My 2 older children were quite small, and so I was reading constantly to them, and I always have a notebook with me. So as I was reading to them, I was coming across tons of useful vocabulary. So that made it much easier. And so I just kept collecting, and until I had what I needed to work with. It got very complicated once I got to words that had there are 31 different vowel combinations. So the ones that had 4 vowels or 3 vowels, some are very limited what you can do. Yeah, but it worked. I still was able to. I was thinking it would be great to do a dictionary like that, for other people who wanted to do that sort of book.
Did Christian Bock really think you know it was for because chapter U is really naughty.
I know, that's the thing. I would never have thought of it that way, but maybe I wonder if he meant he just felt sort of a childlike playfulness as he was doing it, and certain sections would be brilliant for kids. Yeah, I don't know.
I had a related question, which was, what defines a children's poem from an adult poem in your mind? What's the distinction? Because you've written both.
I think it's just what Ted Hughes had a good phrase for it, because he also did both, and he said, poems that were written within hearing of children. And I think it's just that if the concept is, I mean, to be honest, I find it hard to decide sometimes which way to go. I guess it's sometimes the complexity of, or if it's a poem about a relationship, and yet it's hard to say. I think there are things as an adult you don't want to introduce to your children that they may themselves be thinking about or have their own consciousness about. But it's sort of like not an adult's place to talk about those things. And children often have their own sort of, very coarse playground verse, which again, as an adult, I wouldn't want to encourage or discourage. I would want to just ignore it, because it's like a different culture. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I struggle with it. Yeah.
First, I just want to say that I've read a few of these books and I really love them. Robot Bones was amazing. I really loved it. But I was wondering, at the beginning of Down in the Bottom of the Box, there are several poems that seem to have a very specifically Christian focus. And some of them are very playful and very fun, like the one you read, and some of them seem to have a very anti-religious point of view. And I was wondering sort of what your intentions were with the religious stuff at the beginning of the book.
That's a good question. Yeah, I find I grew up in the Anglican church, and I was confirmed, and going to church on Sunday was important. And I love the Bible stories. I love them. They're so rich, and there's so much you can do with them. And my wife is Jewish, and so our kids are being raised in synagogue. But it's, from a Christian point of view, it's great because it's all the same stories. It's, but I don't feel, I wouldn't want it to be read or seen as negative towards the stories, but more just expansive or playful, or, I keep, like in the new book I did, there again several, and in the first book I did, there was, for adults, the first poem is, chased by armed angels through the gates, Adam weeps, but Eve, being shrewd, kept the seeds in her cheeks. And that sort of, I don't know, those stories are very strong to me, and and in this book too, I have a piece about, it's too long to read, but there are a few. Well, actually, this is fairly short. This is about the relationship between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So you can see they're represented by three sisters sitting on a therapist's couch. The therapist looks a little bit like Buddha. So the dynamics are so family-like, and each one has been shaped to a large extent by its sibling order and where Dad was working at the time, Dad representing God. You can almost hear them at a therapy session. Chris to Judy. Well, you were born just after Dad was reposted from Egypt to Palestine, but I grew up in Rome, so my life was completely different. The clothes, and Mom was around more then. And then to go from Rome to Mecca, I thought I'd die. It ruined my adolescence, but Dad insisted. He didn't care what it did to me, and that's where you were born, of course, Issy. Life was never the same after that. So for me, especially the three monotheisms, which is what the tradition I know best, to me it looks always so much like family. like 3 siblings who are just born at different times in different places, and then struggling to give each other space and to grow in the best possible way without killing each other, you know. So, but yeah, that's the religious part. Is I obsess about it. Yeah.
With your poetry, is it always like you sit down and say, I'm going to be writing a poem like this? Or are there times where when you're writing, you're then surprised at the end by what you've created?
Yeah, usually it's a surprise. Very, very rarely I have an idea and I work on the idea. Almost never. Usually the sound is the first thing, the sound and the rhythm, and then if I'm lucky, 90% of what I write ends up being just garbage, like not usable at all. But then, occasionally the sound corresponds with an idea. But this one I'll read because it was idea first and then the poem. But it was still exciting because it could make a poem out of it. It's called Are You Worried? Are you worried you're not like everyone else? Worries will only worsen when you find that the path to conformity is different for each person. So I liked that idea that no matter how hard you tried to fit in,